No real headaches for, all right, good evening. My name is Eric Salerno. I'm the Town Planner and Economic Development Director in Tyngsborough. Thank you for tuning in or attending tonight's meeting for the MBTA Communities Information Session. I'm accompanied by Mike Asciola from NIMCOG. He's going to be giving us some introductions to some of the services that he's been providing to the town to help us move towards compliance with the MBTA Communities legislation and provide an overview of it. Okay, take it away, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Thanks, everyone, for joining us tonight. I'm here to go over the work we've been doing with Tyngsborough, NIMCOG's been doing with Tyngsborough on the MBTA Communities Compliance Project. Just first, kind of to let you know who NIMCOG is and what we do. We're the Northern Middlesex Council of Governments. We represent the greater Lowell area and with the addition of the town of Pepperell as well. And we're the regional planning agency and transportation planning agency for the greater Lowell communities. Specifically, what we're doing with MBTA communities, with the towns of Tyngsborough, Bellrica, Dracut, Chelmsford, through direct technical assistance or DLTA or Mass Housing Partnership, we've they're funding the project. What we're doing is providing direct technical assistance, documenting existing conditions and zoning, investigating locations and development scenarios, evaluating potential development sites, and recommending drafting zoning amendments and assisting with community engagement like tonight and the participatory process, excuse me. For the region, we're also providing a kind of a broad view of what compliance means and what the compliance model is and how to gain compliance through the zoning process. So again, we're consulting, providing planning assistance to our communities to get compliance. We're interpreting the state guidelines to ensure shared understanding of the required goals. We're a technician using GIS to map and test the compliance models for and scenarios. And we're also an educator meeting with local boards and communities to explain the requirements. So on the agenda tonight, we have basically two parts. One, going through the guidelines of the state law, what compliance means in Tyngsborough, what state deadlines are for compliance, how MBTA communities relates to the Tyngsborough's master plan and housing production goals. And then the second part is to look at the district area scenarios, scenario considerations and selection criteria, and a presentation of the preferred and recommended scenario to achieve compliance. MBTA communities, we're going to go through why we're doing this, the legislation, the guidelines, additional considerations, the timeline, and we'll just have discussion questions towards the end. So Massachusetts needs more housing. In the 1950s, Massachusetts was about number 25 as far as housing affordability goes, and today we're the third least affordable state to live in. Massachusetts is among the highest and fastest growing home prices and rents in the nation. The rising costs have dramatically increased financial pressures on low and middle income families, forcing them to sacrifice other priorities in order to pay housing costs. These housing costs are a disadvantage as we compete economically against peer states. The risk of future job growth moving outside of Massachusetts is at risk due to the high cost of living. So with the MBTA communities, there are 177 communities in Eastern Mass that are required to adopt this zoning. So Tyngsborough is not alone. There are plenty of other communities that are facing the same deadlines and zoning for similar capacities. The purpose of the legislation is to address the shortage of housing that struggles to meet the demand and has increased the higher cost of housing. And this sends a ripple effect through every bracket of housing. It encourages the production of housing that is suitable and more accessible to a broader spectrum of community members. Seniors wanting to age in place, your workforce, your municipal employees, all trying to keep them close to their jobs or in the communities that they belong in. Required MBTA communities to create zoning where multifamily is allowed by right, and we'll get into that on another slide coming up. The Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities created the guidelines that are in place to enact the law and provide the towns with guidance. So MBTA communities legislation, an MBTA community shall have zoning ordinance or bylaw that provides for at least one district of reasonable size, and we'll define that later, in which multifamily housing is permitted as of right. Multifamily housing should be without age restrictions, should be suitable for families with children, and a district of reasonable size should have a minimum gross density of 15 units per acre and be this is not applicable to Tyngsborough, but if it was a commuter rail town, then a certain percentage of the housing would have to be about a half mile from the commuter rail station.
Right. In Tyngsborough, it'll be supposed to be closer to your commercial center.
So Tyngsborough's defined as an adjacent community because of its proximity to Lowell. It's surrounded by adjacent communities and then one non-participating community. The capacity size is defined as 750 units and 50 acres, and that's based on Tyngsborough's total number of housing units in the 2020 census. And then the minimum land cover must be at least 50 acres. Half of the district must be contiguous, and no portion should be less than 5 contiguous acres. Neighborhood scale districts and not a single development site are preferred for the districts. So when we're talking about multifamily housing, it's a building with 3 or more residential dwelling units or 2 or more buildings on the same lot with more than 1 residential dwelling in each building. So if you see here, we have kind of the missing middle where we're looking at where 15 units per acre, you're kind of down where in like the fourplex stacked or courtyard area. So that's kind of to try to give you an idea of what the density looks like. Again, a neighborhood of triple deckers might be somewhere between 11 to 30 dwelling units per acre. A 4-stack might be somewhere between 14 and 22. And then multiplex, you can vary anywhere from about 10 to 50 dwelling units an acre. And then courtyard buildings are also pretty much in that same, about 20 to 56 dwelling units per acre. So as I was saying earlier, as of right means that you don't need a special permit, a variance, or a zoning amendment to develop the multifamily development. Additional requirements: communities can't put a higher energy standard than other uses throughout the districts. They can't require third-party certification for other uses that are similar in the district. It can't require a combination of commercial or other uses on the same lot or be part of the project. You can have, however, a site plan review process that does allow the planning board to control certain aspects of the site, such as circulation, lighting, landscaping, and kind of the general layout of the development. But they may be required for as-of-right multifamily uses, and they can't impose unreasonable requirements or regulations to create delays on proposed projects by making them infeasible. And at this point, I'll hand it off to Eric to talk about the effects, direct effects on Tyngsborough.
Sure, thanks. So as Mike had pointed out, one of the reasons behind the legislation is so that the state can find ways to address the housing shortage. Why each individual community should be complying is, to be perfectly frank, is because it is the law. So Tyngsborough is marching towards a proposal that would go to town meeting that would include the presentation of the district boundaries, which we'll see shortly, as well as a zoning amendment that the state would evaluate for compliance. But there are some incentives to comply. By complying, we as a town would maintain eligibility for funding that the community has already benefited from, including Mass Works. The community, as a reminder, has benefited from Mass Works funding for its expansion of the sewer connections and network up and down Middlesex Road for the commercial corridor. It received some pedestrian-friendly and traffic improvements at Flint's Corner. And most recently, we received $2 million to unlock development off of Kendall Road and make improvements to both the park and ride as well as the highway department's parcel. So all of those funds are things that we would become ineligible for if we were a non-compliant community. The reasons and purpose behind the legislation aligns with the goals that the community's already set in our housing production plan that was approved in 2019. It requires or requests and or suggests to the community that it provides a wide range of housing options to meet the housing needs of a diverse population, which isn't to say that Tyngsborough isn't already doing that, but the legislation and compliance with that legislation goes even further to help us meet those goals. The community has been asked to find ways to address the needs of first-time home buyers. Anybody that's tried to buy a home in Tyngsborough anytime recently probably recognizes that it can be a challenge. And it's not just in Tyngsborough, it's in a lot of communities in the Commonwealth. It's asking for us to create diverse rental units in terms of the types of units and the number of bedrooms, support the creation of workforce housing units, and develop rental and ownership options for seniors, people with disabilities, and veterans that allow them to live independently. And without creating additional housing in Tyngsborough, it is becoming continuously more difficult for residents who are aging in place, that are struggling to afford the homes that they're in based on their existing square footage, the tax liability or requirements for where they live, and the overall maintenance. There's just not a lot of diversity and options available for them to remain in Tyngsborough. The more housing that we have here, the more options people will have to live. There are unmet housing needs with regards to finding a larger percentage of housing availability for, as Mike mentioned, workforce community members. It is increasingly difficult for folks in community and municipal jobs, our fire department, teachers, municipal staff, et cetera. It can be difficult to find housing that's affordable within Tyngsborough with those types of incomes. And lastly, as I mentioned, it's required by the state law, so we're doing our best to keep ahead and be proactive rather than risk non-compliance. While it's not on the slide, I have been asked directly is it an option for the community to not comply? And the simple answer is it's really not an option right now. Because of the way the legislation is written, the way it's been addressed by the Attorney General very specifically, communities have not been given an option to not comply. Some folks have asked, well, aren't there some lawsuits or are there other communities that are choosing not to comply? As far as I know, I've only been told of one community that is trying to find ways to not comply with the legislation, is working with the state. I'm not aware of multiple lawsuits, and I don't think it's a fair use, I think, of town resources and funds to try to come up with contingency plans based on the outcome of that 1 out of 177 communities that might be attempting non-compliance. But if something does change at the state level, as Mike mentioned, this MBTA Communities legislation is crafted such that there is legislation that was put into the Zoning Act, which is Chapter 40A, and this section for MBTA Communities is 3A. So when people talk about 3A legislation, MBTA Communities is what they're talking about. The state then clarified exactly what compliance with that legislation means with their guidelines, and they've provided multiple updates to those guidelines. If there are subsequent ones, the community will adjust its strategy to either benefit the community or maintain compliance. So here's a brief overview of the community's timeline. Tyngsborough took what is looking like a very good and pragmatic approach to MBTA compliance, and this is based on conversations I've had with other municipalities. When the community looked at recodifying its zoning bylaw, it formed what is referred to as the Zoning Review Committee. We have two members that have joined us here tonight, Jeremy Baldwin and Eric Eldridge. And the Zoning Review Committee is made up of members from the Select Board, the Planning Board, the Zoning Board of Appeals, and the public at large. And it's been a very productive and cooperative committee. They've gotten recodification passed, if you might recall, from subsequent town meetings, and they've now shifted their focus to housing elements and MBTA communities legislation. And they've been doing a great job coming up with evaluations of various zoning districts, as well as language that will be submitted to the state for evaluation. Speaking of which, they've been working on this since probably prior to November of 2022. I guess that's probably about right. So November of 2022, after the fall town meeting of last year, they shifted gears to focus on MBTA communities. We've been working on that throughout meetings throughout 2023. And our plan is to submit in December of 2023 our preliminary plan to the state, so that we know that when we make a proposal to town meeting in May, the state has already provided some guidance and says if this gets presented and passed, it'll be compliant with us. There will be one other information session held before that gets submitted in December, and that'll be on December 4th, which I believe is a Monday. And we've spaced those out so that we can have this information session take any comments or questions that come out of today's session and/or through email. Make sure that the zoning review committee can work that into their revisions and before it gets submitted to the state. The state's asking for 90 days to review, which means that once it gets submitted in December, we're sort of in a holding pattern until we receive that back sometime in March, which doesn't give the community a lot of time to make adjustments if the state has a lot of recommended suggestions. Because by the time we need to have our public hearings for our zoning amendments in April, it only gives us a handful of weeks to make those adjustments. So it's a relatively tight timeline after December. If it doesn't pass at town meeting in May of 2024, it can return to town meeting in the fall, but our deadline to remain compliant would be December 31st of 2024. But I think that the work that the Zoning Review Committee has been doing will provide a very good solution for the town to consider in May. What you see up here on the screen and on some of the boards around the room, these boards are actually three different parts of one scenario. It's parts of scenario A. Up on the screen here, we have scenarios A, B, and C. And these were pulled from what is called the scenario report that was prepared by the Northern Middlesex Council of Governments, and Mike and his team put those together. What you're seeing is a second iteration of those scenarios. The original draft of the scenario report included very large 50-acre districts around town. And the Zoning Review Committee said, well, do we really need one contiguous 50-acre district to comply? And the answer is no. As you might have heard, you need to have at least one sub-district that's 25 acres, and any sub-districts have to be at least 5. So that gives you a lot of flexibility. So Mike and his team went back to the drawing board. He took some considerations from feedback from the Zoning Review Committee to come up with 3 scenarios that combined various districts, and the Zoning Review Committee ended up selecting scenario A. I'll come back to that when I'll describe scenarios B and C and why they were eliminated. Scenario B combined an area where we have a 40B development where Tyngsborough, it's either Tyngsborough Commons or it's either Merrimack Commons or Tyngsborough Crossings. I can't recall which one of those portions it was. It's the element that's non-rental. So there's already development there that is compliant with the state's regulations. You don't have to have your zoning district in an area where it's virgin land. As long as it's a defined area where construction could be built someday, it's compliant. But the community said, we like having that we like having that area within our compliant district boundaries because we already have some development there. It's unlikely that there'll be a proposal for increased dense housing in that location. So it helps hedge the community's risk of immediate housing development proposals if that's included. The other portion in scenario B was on the west side of Middlesex Road. That large blue square area in the northern portion of scenario B is where we currently have a permitted warehouse industrial development, 500,000 square feet worth, and a large portion of that section is basically occupying the area where that project would be. So we looked at scenario B, the committee did, and said, well, there's probably almost no development that's going to take place unless the warehouse project didn't come to fruition. And if that was the case, now we have a very large area that could have a very large number of housing units that could be proposed at once. So we have 2 negatives. One would be 0 housing to support economic development, and the other one would be if the warehouse project didn't come to fruition, maybe we'd have too many housing units being proposed at once. So that wasn't a favored scenario. Scenario C, again, combined the 40B district that you see on the right-hand side of that square, as well as a portion around Flint's Corner. As you might be aware, Flint's Corner did have special permits in place for mixed-use development, and scenario C was eliminated because it's pretty far from the northern commercial corridor. And while I definitely respect and I work hard every day to try to incorporate economic growth at the Flint's Corner area, as a town, we're looking for ways to support the commercial success that we've had in the northern commercial district of Middlesex, from the state border all the way down to Bryant Lane. and scenario C didn't really do much to help support that. Scenario A included 3 sub-districts. One is the 40A district, 40B district I described earlier. One describes a reduced footprint where the warehouse is located off of Middlesex Road, and it also includes an area where the Pheasant Lane Mall parking area is. Obviously, where the Pheasant Lane parking area is developable today. If housing developments were proposed there, it's a relatively limited area, limiting some of the massive impact that a 750 units might have on the community, but it's large enough to have a positive impact on our retail corridor. So I feel like it provides an excellent economic impact to the commercial corridor up north, while limiting the risks and mitigating some of those negative impacts to the town. Before I move on with a description of scenario A, I know a couple of folks had some questions about some of the evaluations for the scenarios. What were some of the other thoughts that went into selecting scenario A, or were there areas that people thought the committee should have considered that weren't? And Billy, I know that you had mentioned that a little bit, right?
Well, I saw it online, you had all scenarios. When did you decide on that scenario?
Sure. So the zoning review committee, which broadcasts their meetings, reviewed the proposals that had come in from NIMCOG. As I mentioned, they're
We don't all go to meetings and watch the broadcast,
To-
okay?
totally understand. So when the initial draft of areas that they had provided, but after their evaluation around town, they narrowed it down to sub-districts. And then I would say in August or September is when the zoning review committee decided to move forward and recommend scenario A with a 3-district combination.
I see online, here, how are we gonna overcome, they mentioned, because of our agreement with the Pheasant Lane Mall, okay? We're gonna put housing in where there's gonna be a casino at Sears, where Sears used to be. Is there a discussion about that?
Well,
How we're gonna overcome the agreement and the parking lot being attached to the Pheasant Lane Mall?
sure. I think it's a little bit less about the agreement that the town has with the mall, which it's more, the only agreements that the town has when the casino got approved was we had some public safety meetings to understand the public safety protocols to respond to emergencies. But the requirements for the MBTA communities is that you have land within your community that's zoned for multifamily development by right. In my opinion, it's a bit unfortunate that the casino has been approved while we were evaluating these scenarios, only because I think it has a slight negative impact with regards to the likelihood that those housing units could be developed. As you mentioned, the way you phrased it was, well, we're going to build housing on the parking lots, and how does that affect our either agreements or relationships with Nashua and or the,
Building somebody else's.
they could,
They could, but they may never do it.
but they might never do it, right, so, exactly.
Okay, I like hearing that part.
Yep, our only objective and requirements are to come up with zoning that makes it possible, and we do our best to try to, I would do my best as a planner and economic development director to support proposals and developers that came in to investigate it. But we can only do so much, right? I couldn't control whether the casino went in or not. We have relatively limited options in that portion of town to select from in order, if we were interested in building housing, which is the whole purpose, to support the economic development up there. I still think that, even with the casino, I still think that that area is our best option.
I'm a little disappointed that the state would spend millions of dollars doing Flint Corner, and Flint Corner, and we remove that from, as an option. I really don't understand that part.
Well, we're not,
That seems like a natural.
sure, and I totally understand your point. I don't look at it as removing it, we've removed it as an option or a selection for the MBTA communities, but we haven't removed it from the mixed-use zoning.
So we could have that in addition to this.
Correct.
Well, that's a bigger issue for me, okay, we're adding all that extra housing. Now, if we can just go to this screen here, and I'll finish this in a little bit before I, in the middle. doesn't that say that we expect to make those buildings, Merrimack Way, those three, there's actually three different parcels there, three-story buildings?
No, it doesn't.
Well, that says height buildings three.
Correct. So the,
I didn't understand that part.
the zoning that would be there, if somebody wanted to knock down those buildings and construct something that was 3 stories or that was compliant with the definition that you see here, that's certainly possible, but probably not likely at all. Given the age of those buildings, they're practically brand new. I wouldn't anticipate them to be redeveloped based on the rezoning whatsoever. It would be,
How many buildings are in those parcels already?
it's completely developed.
How many total units of housing are there?
That is a good question. I should know that off the top of my head, but I would say I think it's 120 across both developments.
Isn't that, if that was zoned for that, wouldn't that become 411?
But how would you do that now that it's already developed?
I don't know, I'm asking.
Right, so my point is, one of the reasons why the zoning review committee selected and included that district boundary in their proposed scenario, if you will, for their district boundaries, is that they looked at it as an area that was unlikely to see new development proposed anytime soon, probably decades. And the reason why they like that, and I have to sort of play a couple of different perspectives from my role as a planner, right? So I'm trying to acknowledge the state's desire to increase housing, but I also respect Tyngsborough's efforts and success in developing housing in its community already. So when the state created relatively flexible rules for us to follow, meaning you can pick a district boundary where there's already been development on the ground, as long as it's permissible by right and it might not happen for decades to come, they're considering that compliant.
That's
So we,
compliant as long as it has a potential.
someday, could be 100 years from now, but yeah.
Well, we don't know,
Right.
we've got to be careful what we put on tape too. So 411 units could be on that piece of property, right?
Right, so if heaven for,
Someone wanted to rip them down and put new buildings up.
correct.
Okay. Well, I can aid that.
Okay, good. Yeah, I would like, if I was gonna summarize the perspectives of the zoning review committee, and they can speak up if they thought I was misrepresenting their priorities or objectives, they were looking for combinations of district boundaries that mitigated the immediate impact risk with regards to impact on the community services, some people might say schools or other elements, while still trying to maximize or utilize this as a catalyst for economic development near our commercial corridor.
I would recommend before you have your next session in December, you reach out to everyone in that facility in there, like a special reach out, some flyers or phone calls to them or something. Because they're the ones that's the biggest part here, and they may not understand everything you just said to me.
Mhm.
If you look online, you see 411 and 3-story buildings. It makes it look like we're gonna put skyscrapers in there, you wouldn't
Right.
be able to see the bridge.
Right,
So
right, that's
it's
not the
important to
intention.
get that information out, what we just talked about. And
Sure,
that can be easily misunderstood. You go online, you say, I'm pretty good at reading this garbage. And that's confusing.
okay. Yeah, I'm hoping the information sessions
Good we
like
get
this.
that word out, but
Yep.
this doesn't mean these buildings are gonna get torn down, and everybody living there is not gonna have a place to live.
Oh, absolutely not.
I know, this can look that way to some.
No, I appreciate that feedback, so understanding what the community's concerns might be, I'll be happy to make sure that they get addressed. Sure.
So it sounds relatively like, obviously this is most likely not gonna get developed. There's potential that because of the casino, they're not gonna develop on the land that's being proposed by the Pheasant Lane. So essentially, we have one possible district next to this warehouse proposal,
Which is actually
Seems-
behind 440, right?
but I think that comment's done.
Yep, behind Olive Garden and behind 440.
So, I mean, is there potential to expand this zone, like, the goal of this is to build this, is kind of to, what some may want, but we're trying to make housing more affordable, it's in one district that's very limited in size, like, is there, if this fails, you go back and reevaluate and potentially expand
Sure.
down
So-
that Middlesex corridor?
So let's say we present this to town meeting in May and it passes, and 3 years go by and no housing gets produced for various reasons. the community can look at that and say, great, well, we created this zoning amendment and this extra district, but it's not serving its purpose. Nothing's actually happening. We think the following changes should be made so that we can create an opportunity. Zoning is flexible, right? That's why we have amendments. That's why we have town meeting. So those types of changes and proposals are designed to respond to the market.
Is there any timeline built into this where if development doesn't occur, that they reevaluate it, or is that?
Nope, it would really be up to the community, it would be up to other boards, it would be up to the public if they wanted to come in and say, it's been 3 years, I'd like the planning board, what's the planning board's opinion about considering an amendment to the zoning district itself? Why do we think that there hasn't been anything built? Are there other projects in the way? Is the casino parking so crowded that they cannot possibly build on any of the area within Tyngsborough? Or maybe we do get some proposals on that area because of the casino, because they might like to see, you know, a combination of either housing and or hotel.
Just a quick question, do you think that there's potential risk that when the state gets all these proposals, and I don't think it's just Tyngsborough that's doing this, where they're rezoning parcels that already have housing existing, or parcels that might be less developable, is there a risk that the state asks communities to reevaluate what they've proposed? Because I feel like, especially with scenario A, there's actually very limited potential for development with those districts, and I understand why you guys chose them.
Yep.
But do you think there's a risk that when the state sees that, okay, this isn't working like we thought it had? Because when it comes down to it, higher density housing is going to have to happen. And if the state sees that it's not necessarily with this, do you see that there's a risk that they could ask for reevaluation?
Well, I think that if the administration does not see the needle move the way they're either hoping to or intending to from this legislation, yep, I could easily see them trying to make revisions or impose other requirements. So some people compare the MBTA communities legislation to 40B. So 40B, their whole purpose was to basically bypass zoning so that higher density housing could get constructed. People accepted the process. Tyngsborough's had projects go in. Some people like it, some people don't. It's the law and the town complies, but it also provides a safe harbor, right? So when your community's at 10% or more, you have more flexibility with regards to denying a 40B application. It also gives the community opportunity to find other opportunities for what they call friendly 40Bs, but that create affordable housing in other designated areas.
See, I can also. A different perspective than this gentleman. We've already met our 10%.
Right.
Okay, we dutifully met our 10% in Tyngsborough, okay? Much of the affordable housing in Tyngsborough is no longer even affordable to many people, okay? It's considered affordable, but still some young families can't afford to live in it. So now here comes the state and throwing this down my throat, after we already did this. And some people forget the Community Preservation Act, okay? In 2000, I sat at those meetings. The biggest thing that people in this town wanted to do was buy up open space with community preservation funds. I went to all the meetings. Everyone was, we don't want buildings, we don't want more buildings. We don't want more. We don't want to look like Drayton or Chelmsford or Westford. We don't want to look like that. But now, all that money's been gone to all other purposes except buying up property in Tyngsborough. So we met our obligation. My fear is, if we met the 750 obligation, they would just come back and say, oh, we got you, now you can give us some more, you gave us that. So I think it has quite the reverse.
Right, and I totally acknowledge your perspective, and that was one of my first reactions when the state's legislation was passed. The legislation itself, I mean, I really don't think I'm burning any bridges, and I'm not really saying anything that hasn't already been pointed out, that the legislation itself is a bit of a sledgehammer of a rule, right? So every adjacent MBTA community has exactly the same requirements, whether you've developed lots of housing or no housing. I didn't really consider that to be too fair. You know, the legislation requires zoning to be put in place, you know, before infrastructure. There are answers to that. But that was some of the reasoning behind the zoning review committees and even my guidance to them with regards to sort of how to play the state's rules. So that's why we have district areas that don't necessarily lead to immediate development, but in some areas where we think that it has the most positive impact, it can. So that's why I don't look at it, I'm not as a planner, I'm not frustrated with the zoning review committee. The zoning review committee accepts, that it's the state law and is looking at the legislation the proper way, where they're, where are the, I don't wanna say loopholes, but what rules have they put together so that we can come up with an actual strategy instead of just giving a sledgehammer solution to a sledgehammer legislation. I would say that the zoning review committee has done a good job coming up with nuanced responses, with a real strategic response, to a, I don't wanna say a challenging piece of legislation, but one that, different communities have different responses to. So I appreciate your point.
Also, to elaborate on the question about if the state is going to review based on potential development, I've had conversations with them because there are communities that I'm working with that are proposing similar, even more, have more of their capacity tied up in existing developments, and they say they're not going to make you change your district boundaries, but they are going to make sure that all of the zoning, it'll get a higher level of scrutiny when it comes to the zoning ordinance and the lands that are selected based upon the guidelines.
So they're going to be looking at which parcels we selected.
For compliance, yes.
Yeah, they will be evaluated. That's why we'll be submitting that in December. And, based on what Mike and I have seen in other communities and what's being submitted, I would say Tyngsborough's proposals with regards to where its district boundaries are much more reasonable than some other communities' proposals are. I'm not anticipating a lot of pushback from the state. We've been checking in with them with regards to where we've been headed with these scenarios, while the zoning review committee's been considering them. But it's not an official submission where we can get an official response yet.
At what point can I read the statement?
I don't see why you can't right now.
Okay. I understand that attempting to comply with Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority Communities legislation requirements is necessary. That's the MBTA. And why we're trusting them to do their involvement in someone that can't even run the T or in Boston is concerning to me. Metro Boston surrogates concocted this concept. One wonders which big money builders actually lobbied for this. Massachusetts is the third most densely populated state in the nation. I say this every time I get a chance. Only New Jersey or Rhode Island have more persons per square mile than Massachusetts. It makes no sense to me to excessively increase the housing density here in the eastern part of Massachusetts, a postage state. Transportation and highway improvements toward the western part of the state, where there's a lot more land than there is here, would foster housing development that's much less crowded. So 2 words from me, go west. Thank you.
Sure. If I could just respond briefly to that, I sit in on a lot of presentations and meetings from an economic development perspective that even for the last 5 years, even if they're not about housing, I get a lot of feedback about where Massachusetts is competitively, not just Tyngsborough, not just Middlesex 3 region, but eastern Massachusetts and Massachusetts as a state. And it's concerning with some of the data associated with the employers that are either choosing to leave the state, and they're citing housing costs and housing availability as some of the reasons why that they can't stay. I don't think it's debatable with regards to how the economic development in the state has contributed to the increase in housing prices. We're successful because we have a very smart and intelligent workforce. That attracts businesses that want to operate and run and work in Massachusetts. They relocate here, they hire here, those people look for housing, they're good paying jobs. If there's not enough extra housing getting constructed, there's no place else for the housing prices to go but up, right? Right, but if you're talking about going out west, that's not where the jobs are. So
If you build a transportation structure, they will commute.
Oh, absolutely.
From that housing to here. So, and just because there are other reasons that businesses are not doing well in Massachusetts, we pass millionaire taxes, okay? We expect them to stay here, okay? So there's a lot of reasons other than housing for that.
Sure.
We can stick with this.
Yep, and I think it's unfortunate that the state used MBTA as identifying their legislation. It makes some level of sense because where the MBTA runs is how they selected the communities that would be subject to the legislation, but it has, in my opinion, relatively little to do with the transportation itself, particularly in communities like Tyngsborough. That's an adjacent community, right? We don't have a train station, we have relatively limited bus service, but because of the proximity and the way they've identified and increased the land area where that legislation is gonna be applicable, they've sort of said if you border a community that has a train station, you have slightly less requirements, but you're still required to comply.
So we have a selectman here this evening. We have a bus that comes from out of Lowell, goes up Lakeview Ave, goes to AOTS, they go into AOTS, buy the cigarettes and beer, go back, get on the bus and go back to Lowell, okay? Why don't we, and if someone in this community has a residence, and you want to park your car someplace to take the bus, where do I go?
Totally agree.
That's absurd.
right.
I go into AOTS and ask, can I park my car here? They come here, buy cigarettes and beer. Oh, I don't know, I have to talk to the manager. You know, that's kind of unreal. So maybe we could talk to them, the bus.
The LRTA, yep.
Now that we have a municipal lot in Lowell, in Tyngsborough.
Yep.
Have them come over to our municipal lots and then let people know, you can park your car here and go and take the bus.
I can't agree with you more. So I've already had some discussions with folks that are associated with the LRTA, and the project that I mentioned at the very beginning of today's meeting, the $2 million grant at 93 Kendall, to expand the park and ride is a perfect opportunity for us to have those conversations to increase bus service in Tyngsborough.
Some places people have, I hope our parking lot stays free forever. If it doesn't, I'll blow my brains out, okay? And we pay it with CPC money. In the center of town, you park your car and get on the bus and go Lowell, do some business, go Lowell, do shopping, whatever.
Yeah. No, I agree. And that's a transportation issue. And even though MBTA Communities is part of the name of the legislation we're talking about tonight, our discussion tonight really focuses on the zoning itself and housing.
I just had to take that opportunity.
Totally get it. And I'm happy to chat with you about that more. Tyngsborough does have a designee to the LRTA, and the town manager and I have actually talked about it twice in the last 3 weeks to
Been
talk
talking
about.
it for 5 years.
Nope, I totally understand.
And this ain't the first time I brought it up. Okay?
Yep. All right, yep, go ahead.
Are there any proposed developments already on these two sites that are available to you? Has that happened or?
There are no proposals on the Pheasant Lane Mall parking areas yet. I did receive quite a few inquiries over the last several years for different types of development. And I've been telling everybody we're working on MBTA communities, but we were not gonna pass the, compliant amendments until we're closer to the deadline. And while we were sort of waiting to address the legislation, the casino got permitted, so that's kind of where we're at. And then across the street, in that smaller area, as I mentioned, there is a permitted industrial development there. It hasn't, that permitting process ended quite some time ago. They did come in to request an increase in their ceiling heights for their warehouse. That's all I've seen from them so far. I would anticipate that their project is gonna go forward, but the capital markets have changed a lot since their initial proposal, so financing's a challenge.
So that would have bought the current proposed zoning there?
That zoning area is overlapping where their proposed development is. So the only way housing could be developed in that portion is if the warehouse project didn't come to fruition.
So there seems to be some stalls in this process that could eventually lead to a zero development and circumvent the intention of the MBTA.
It's possible that it could make it challenging. Yep, I won't deny that.
But it's an incentive.
If you pass the zoning, we need 2/3 vote, right?
It depends on the way the amendments are constructed and presented to the town. That was a question that had come up in one of the, guidance meetings that I was in over the last week or two. Because there was legislation that changed town meeting quantum requirements, meaning not quorum, but the number of votes required to pass housing-related amendments. So amendments that are addressing an increase in housing typically have a threshold of a simple majority at this point. So I'm anticipating that the town will probably be proposing amendments structured such that they'd only require a simple majority for passing.
I'm not sure I heard.
The state, in their housing choice legislation, changed the thresholds for housing-related amendments.
Part of the 3A legislation?
It was separate from this legislation.
Okay, now I get it.
Yep. All right, so we've actually done a pretty good job covering some of the slides that I had in the presentation, that Mike put into the presentation, for the sections for scenario A. They basically provide the close-ups that the folks in this room have been able to see. I'll scroll through them a little bit on the screen so that media recording can actually get them. So if Karen, you can hear me, I'll scroll through these and hold on them a little bit so that the public who might be seeing a recording of today's meeting can see what we're referring to. So this is where the 40B development already exists. It covers a gross area of 27.5 acres, which means that you only have less than 25 acres to make up in your other sub-districts. This is another outline of that area. This is the area outlined for the parking areas in Tyngsborough for the Pheasant Lane Mall that the district would occupy. There are portions that I think might not necessarily be utilized for, extended parking for the casino. We'll see. It does go all the way back behind, it's actually farther south than, I believe,
Well, that section there, that's where they had, where the bike, where they train
the motorcycle school. Yep. But it goes all the way back behind the Bahama Breeze parking area, so it's pretty large. So I think that's Smoky Bones, that's Simon's Auto, and this is the parking lot for Bahama Breeze. And then this is the motorcycle training area that Billy just mentioned. This is the area that is within the industrial portion of the area where the warehouse is proposed. The warehouse proposal does limit its impact on the B3 district, which is at the front. As I mentioned, the MBTA district is where the footprint, or part of where the footprint for that warehouse would be constructed if it goes through. It has been permitted, we're just waiting to see if the development takes place. This is the unit capacity per district table. I'm not gonna go through the data specifically that's on here, but seeing this semi-complicated table is a good time to explain a little bit about what the state is requiring communities to do to demonstrate compliance. Mike might be able to explain this a little bit as well. It's a fairly complicated process that requires some mapping tools as well as evaluating and comparing buildable area. So while structures that are on the ground don't count against your district area, wetlands would, right? So you can't just pick a giant wet area and say that's our district. It needs to be buildable, but it doesn't have to be unbuilt. Is that a good way to describe it?
Yep, yeah, and if you do select an area that contains wetlands, your developable density has to go up in the areas. So, Tyngsborough, you can see in Districts 1 and 3, it's almost all buildable. District 2 does have a slight area, looks like a little over an acre, or about an acre, of undevelopable land. So, and that's why if you see the fourth row down in that column, the dwelling units per acre is at 16.1 rather than 15.0, but the gross density would be 15. It would end up being 15 units per acre.
So since you've been asking about like the potential and how that affects each area, the numbers that are probably most important on this slide are in the top gray bar that runs left to right. So that's the final unit capacity per district. District 1, the sub-district 1 is where the 40B development is, unlikely to be developed anytime soon, but it's a large area, so it has a capacity of 411 units. District 2 is where the parking area is. It has a capacity of 184 units. And District 3, where in the industrial portion across the street, has 155.
And you'd find this if you went online, MBTA Communities, NIMCOG scenarios.
Correct, so, thanks,
It's a colored font.
yes, thanks for bringing that up.
Find that slide, correct?
What I would recommend for folks that are either searching for information, on our town website, we've created a page for MBTA Communities that we've linked this document there, as well as I can't remember if we linked the AG's letter. We're trying to provide as much information associated with MBTA Communities, as well as the materials that the zoning review committee is using, so that they can review it. I'll take a look at that and see if I can find that.
Action draft, there's an action draft,
Right.
and the scenarios, and then there's something else, but that, I can see the AG.
Okay, I'll see if I can find that. That,
If I did, I will notice.
thank you for looking. That brings us to the end of tonight's presentation for information session. I'm glad that some folks have come in to voice some support for, designating areas where it's more likely for housing to be developed to help meet the points and purposes of the law. I appreciate folks coming in to express some concerns with regards to how they feel with regards to the state's requirement on the community and whether it's appropriate or not. These are all things that the zoning review committee and the planning department and eventually town meeting will be taken into consideration as well. And we're hoping that the proposals that do get presented in town meeting are enough of a compromise that everybody feels like it's a good step forward for the community and ensures that you remain compliant and eligible for the funding that the community is taking full advantage of.
May I just ask one more thing?
Absolutely.
You did make a comment earlier about we have to do it no matter what. And I'd like a little more discussion of that part, because I'm very concerned, as you heard from my statement, that the state, a socialist state, in my opinion, okay, is forcing this upon us like this. Because they get by with this, they're not gonna stop. Okay? So, in my opinion. So if the folks decided to forego the $2 million, what could they do to us? If we said, okay, take your Mass Works and shove it, take all your other funding and shove it, what could they do to us other than that? That's what I'm asking you.
Well, MassWorks isn't the only program that you wouldn't be eligible for anymore. So there's,
I have a list.
right, so there's quite a few. And I think that it would be not in the citizens or the community as a whole's best interest to forego a strategic compliance model that we're talking about here in exchange for the loss of those opportunities.
Understand what I'm saying? I agree with you.
Okay,
Except to the point that saying there is no other option. I mean, they can't send us to jail, right?
they can't send you to jail, but from a legal perspective, I think it would, that's where it would go, right? So if the town is not compliant, meaning we submit it to town meeting in May and it doesn't pass, we make revisions and submit it in the fall of next year and it doesn't pass, the town is now non-compliant and vulnerable to a lawsuit. Do we think that the Attorney General is going to bring lawsuits against non-compliant communities? Probably not. Could they? Legally, they could. Could the town be vulnerable to lawsuits from a developer that says, where's my opportunity to build multifamily in Tyngsborough? You're not compliant with the state law. And then that, we haven't seen those lawsuits yet.
So
Yep.
that's the type of thing I like to hear that said.
Yep.
Not just leave it vaguely and.
Yep, no problem.
Why would we be in trouble not doing it?
Yes.
I think it's valuable to say that,
And I appreciate the question.
okay? So we know what the alternatives actually are.
Yep.
So, thank you.
You're welcome.
So my only final point, so, it seems essentially that we're trying to fit about 330 units in after settling on the Merrimack Way. And I just feel that if you open the zoning, just in the Middlesex corridor from Bryant Lane up to the mall, that's already developed, industrial, a lot of those buildings are older. There's a potential there for mixed use to redevelop those things that are already built, just, so you're not impacting the town in terms of land, open space. But meeting these guidelines, adding housing, I just think that, you're very limited in this current proposal, and the expansion of that opens it up to the market, it opens it up to other developers to get better projects. And two cents.
I appreciate that, and I don't want the community to feel like planning and zoning stops, if and when the community passes, MBTA Communities compliant amendments. As a planner, you know, I don't feel like MBTA Communities gave me a lot of tools to work with to come up with zoning that I think is most beneficial to the community. I do think we have to come up with compliant zoning so that we're in compliance, but I think that once we can get past this hurdle, residents and other interested parties can voice their opinions. I can continue to advocate for rezoning for mixed use. There's a lot of constraints within the guidelines that the state has provided where if we want to be compliant in this district, we can't require mixed use. But if we have other areas within the Middlesex corridor, commercial corridor, where we do want to come up with more creative zoning to either encourage or require mixed use or come up with combinations and incentives for multifamily development that supports the commercial corridor itself, I'm all for it. I just can only do a handful of things at a time.
And can that be added to if another parcel was agreed to, could be added to the total count?
You could add so if we passed what you're seeing here today, and that's compliant, and then the community says that's not enough, we wanna look at other areas where we have more multifamily development, but we also wanna support commercial components. If it gets rolled into that district, it wouldn't be compliant, otherwise I would do it now. So it's less of an additive component of our MBTA district, and I would consider it more of a complementary zoning component for a better mixed-use district. So the town has mixed-use zoning, it's in limited areas in the town, and the language within the zoning bylaw is relatively limited. We haven't really seen any development successfully come from that amendment, from that zoning bylaw. So I think after MBTA Communities is done, it's worth a look to see what types of improvements can we make to that language, and should it be applied anywhere else in town.
And also, sir, that would open up this discussion about how much does it cost the school children? How much does the police and fire cost us? And usually, often folks that can afford this housing can't pay the tax burden that it costs that to school children at 14 to 20 grand a year. So there's a lot of discussion.
Right.
Plus road, and there's a lot less kids, and there's ways to work within that, but I understand what you're saying.
So for tonight's meeting, I'm not gonna bring up or discuss, like the costs associated with specific types of community impacts, because unfortunately, it's not part of the legislation, it's not something that we really can take into consideration for the zoning, but,
I
nope,
don't agree with that.
just wait. But I have actually been putting together some studies to address those types of questions, because in a lot of cases, people will bring up specific numbers of either what it costs to educate somebody or what it doesn't. So a lot of times those numbers are extremely high because they're a rudimentary calculation. So I've been doing some studies, I'm reviewing them with the town manager, I might review them with the select board at some point so that we can have a better discussion and use more accurate numbers about what those real costs are. But that's something that I'm looking at from an analysis perspective.
750 units of housing as required
Mhm.
must be able to house families. that
Correct.
that
It can't be-
usually have children,
Right, it can't be age restricted, so a lot of them don't have children, but they do, you can't restrict them from being there, and the zoning should be applicable for 3-bedroom units. Of course, if you've got 3 bedrooms, you'll probably have children in those dwellings, absolutely. But just remember, the zoning proposal that we're discussing here, that the zoning review committee has been crafting, isn't for the construction of 750 units. They're not even for the immediate possibility of 750 units,
I understand
but it
that.
has that
I
capacity.
understand, I'm heartened by what I heard.
Oh, absolutely, yep. Yep,
Keeping it within the scenarios, I think it would be beneficial for whatever committee that would.
yep, the zoning review committee.
Yep, I think it would be beneficial for them to go back and look at the Flint's Corner proposal again, just because, like Mr. Crawford had mentioned before, we already have pedestrian infrastructure in place there, we have bicycle infrastructure in place, all of which was provided by the MassWorks grant. And the other districts that we have proposed, whether it's that northern commercial region or the southern region, we really don't have any pedestrian-friendly infrastructure there. I think that would be something great for the town to consider, because especially with the 40B developments already in place, you have that in close proximity to other retail establishments, and all that's already there. And I'm sure that's something that you have considered. I just think that we should look back at that, because, you know, whether it's mixed use or not, Flint's is developable, and you already have a lot of things in place that would be helpful to those residents. And I think that was something else that the state, or it's going to be something else that the state's going to want to look at, is that less car-based infrastructure and more so the pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure, and that's
Agreed.
already there.
Thank you. I really appreciate you bringing that up.
I tried this. A couple of times it came and it blossomed and flower fell off a couple of different times, hasn't it?
Yep.
Developing there, 96 units,
Yes.
a couple of different times.
No, I appreciate you all coming out tonight, and I'm glad that we have some members who got to hear your comments directly, and it'll be brought to the review committee. It'll definitely be a discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Look at that, right on time.